Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Wildly controversial and undeniably influential, 1980s Maniac follows Frank Zito, a mentally unstable and deeply traumatized man, played with chilling intensity by Joe Spinell, who conceived the story and co-wrote the screenplay. Frank prowls the streets of New York City, murdering women and scalping them, affixing their hair to mannequins he keeps in his apartment, creating a grotesque substitute for human connection. Unlike many slashers preoccupied with body counts and mass killers, Maniac delves deep into Frank's psyche, offering a grim character study shaped by childhood abuse and loneliness. Tom Savini's gruesome practical effects are on glorious full display, while director William Lustig's gritty, grimy depiction of early 80s New York, combined with Jay Chattaway's haunting synth score and Robert Lindsay's innovative camera work, result in an oppressive and impressive bleak tone that lingers long in the mind. Savagely criticized upon release for its extreme violence and claims of misogyny, Maniac has since gained a cult following and stands as an unsettling portrait of madness and urban despair. More a character study than conventional slasher, a raw, transgressive, and unforgettable experience, and a shining example of true independent filmmaking. I warned you not to go out tonight. We're celebrating Maniac, and we've got an amazing panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Nicola McCafferty.
I'm one of those fancy schmancy women.
Beaming in from Canada, John W. Bowen.
And I'm just suddenly bereft of Maniac quotes.
And the inimitable Art Ettinger.
That would be me.
And we are going to be chatting about Maniac from 1980. And we're also going to be talking about Maniac, the remake from 2012. And we will be chatting spoilers for both of those films, so just be prepared. Thanks for coming on the show, buddy, and welcome. Nicola, thank you for joining us tonight. I know you have a vested interest in any film that has mannequins in it, and this one has plenty of them. Can you tell our viewers kind of what the origin is around your interest in mannequins and horror?
Yeah, so I did bring my own personal mannequin into the background here, just for today's recording. She normally lives off screen. But my interest in mannequins comes from my dissertation, which looks at non-human women, mannequins, aliens, cyborgs, all of that good stuff. And originally kind of inspired by the Twilight Zone episode, The After Hours, which is why my mannequin is named Marcia. And I have written about Maniac, though it doesn't feature heavily in my dissertation because the mannequins are not like kind of the central characters, though. I was looking back at this paper that I wrote, 3 or 4 years ago for an exploitation cinema class, and I'm making the argument that they're kind of like embodied representations of Frank's internal femininity. So that's fun and will be fun to talk about.
Awesome. John, I know you tend to favor kind of some B-movie schlock. This is a little grittier than what I'm used to. What brought you to Maniac?
Well, in the most literal sense, I watched it on VHS back in the day. It's funny how many of early experiences with these films that we're examining involve substance abuse, because that one, it was just a couple of friends invited me over. One of them had already seen it, knew that the rest of us were into sort of the gnarliest stuff you can find. And something possessed us all to do acid for this. And that, very shortly became evident that was a bad idea. Because there are certain horror films that really work well with hallucinogens. This just, if you think it's downbeat while you're not altered, good God, it doesn't get any better while you're really peaking. Like you're peaking and you're basically plummeting at the same time. I've gone back and revisited over the years. Quite a bit later, working with Rue Morgue, they brought Bill Lustig up to Toronto when Blue Underground, when they did the DVD release of the Blu-ray, I can't quite remember, but anyway, we brought him up. Did a screening of Maniac at Lure Cinema, which was this very sort of it was a rep cinema, but it was like this big old crumbling movie house that's not there anymore. It was actually rather unsafe. But anyway, I wound up doing a live Q&A with him afterwards. Just absolute prince among men. But you don't doubt at all his credentials as someone who had been basically up to his chin in just the absolute sleaze of that period. So that was something that sort of got me even more interested in it. If you had told me back in the day that I would eventually wind up watching this like well into double digits, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are.
And Art, how did you come to Maniac for the first time?
I was a movie nerd from a very young age. When people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, instead of saying something lame like a cop or a fireman, I said I wanted to be a movie critic. That's what I always said from childhood. And I was obsessed with all kinds of movies, but I gravitated towards horror movies at a very young age. And as soon as my family got its first VCR, that's when I was really off and running between that and cable, and saw Maniac at a young and impressionable age, and it blew my mind. It was one of the movies that really made me love cinema in general, not just horror and exploitation cinema. And I would have probably been, early junior high when I saw it, maybe sixth grade, 11, 12 years old. And, other people, some of the horror movies that really captivated them at that age might be something like The Thing or Dawn of the Dead. For me, it was movies like Maniac and Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave. So, yeah, Maniac just has a special place in my heart. And then over the years, I've been very fortunate to get to do things like, if you've seen any of the Blue Underground releases of Maniac since 2010, there's an interview with Caroline Munro on there. I conducted that interview, and I'm very proud of it. That was an extremely good time. If you had told me as a child that someday I'd be sitting in a hotel room interviewing Caroline Munro as a special feature on a DVD, I would not have believed it. And I also have other personal connections to the movie that we can get to later. But no, it's just a movie that puts a smile on my face. Some people's comfort movies are, Grease or that's a bad example because that's also a comfort movie of mine. But if you asked me to list 5 to 10 comfort movies, for me, Maniac would be one of them. It's just a feel-good movie that makes me smile from ear to ear every time I see it.
We're going to be talking about what you like about it, what makes you feel good about it. Nicola, we kind of jumped over how you came to Maniac for the first time. What's your origin story?
Actually, I'm not sure if I watched it for the first time, like pre or post Mannequins being such a big part of my dissertation. But yeah, I just, an ex of mine, we watched it together. We would watch all sorts of like horror schlock. I definitely loved it. I was super excited when I took the exploitation cinema class to revisit it and get to write about it and think about it, especially because, and like, I'm not really like a psychoanalyst. Like that's not my sort of like discipline in terms of like film analysis, but it's like a psychoanalyst wet dream. There's so much mommy issues in this movie. So it was really fun to apply a lot of the kind of classic horror scholarship like Carol Clover, Linda Williams to this. Yeah, and I've seen it, I don't know, a good dozen of times as well, taking notes on it, like watching and rewatching scenes and thinking about how the mannequins operate there, especially in relation to the film's weird gender universe. So yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's a comfort watch for me, and I find it deeply, deeply sad, but I don't find it like perhaps as misogynistic as one might imagine.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to chatting about all that. I remember this is just one that was perennially on the video store shelves. Like it was, every video store I've ever been in my life had a copy of Maniac. And that poster art is just so incredible, so indelible. I know that it scared me off for several years, and it wasn't until later. I think like when Blockbuster would do like a free movie on your birthday, I would tour around and like hit all the Blockbusters in my neighborhood and bring home a big stack of movies and watch them on my on my birthday. And that was one of those I remember watching in the midst of it. And I remember just being really struck by Joe Spinell's performance.
Yeah.
Like, it is such a go for broke, invested, deeply grounded. It's clearly a film that he felt passionate about and that he was willing to give 100% to. While, yes, Tom Savini's effects are incredible and very memorable, it was Spinell's performance that I think carries that movie and helps it endure. It was really, from an acting standpoint, was something I was not expecting at all. The basic story is that we've got a character, Frank Zito, living in New York back in the grimy heyday of the late 70s, early 80s. He's got issues because he's a maniac. And he goes out and murders people on the regular. It seems mostly it's the women that he scalps and brings home their scalps and nails them to the mannequins that he has collected around his apartment. As the story goes on, he meets a photographer and goes off on a very interesting tangent. The movie does. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, so I mean, it doesn't seem like it's anything out of the ordinary. It doesn't feel like it's anything just on the page of something we haven't seen before. Again, I think it's Spinell's performance. I think it's Savini's effects. And I think it's Lustig's just kind of gritty, gotta make a movie spirit that takes it over the top. Art, I'm going to come back down to you. What are some of the things that you love about Maniac?
Well, Maniac, it was kind of hard to tell all those years watching it at home. I don't know how many of you were fortunate enough in 2010, Grindhouse re-released it theatrically, and they struck brand new 35 millimeter prints of Maniac. And there's a certain quality that Super 16 millimeter has when blown up to 35 millimeter that's not as noticeable at home. It can look pretty darn clean at home, but there's a really cool look. It's a distinct look that you get when you blow up Super 16 to 35. And when I finally got to see it that way, it really made me appreciate how the film was intended to look. I mean, they knew that it would play theatrically, and I got to see it at the end of 2010 when it was re-released that way. There is something about Spinell, not just in Maniac, in anything he's in. He's an extraordinarily compelling screen presence. You know, a lot of people question when watching the movie, why would this beautiful photographer go on a date with someone who looks like that? But in real life, serial killers tend to be charismatic, whether or not they're conventionally good looking. Some of them are conventionally good looking, right? You can look at certain serial killers and say, well, this is a above average looking individual. But some of them just had charisma, and this movie captures that concept really well. I think that they were just trying to make an exciting horror film. I don't know that they knew how seedy and sleazy of a movie they were making. And it just is, the grime factor is off the charts and a delight to someone with a twisted sensibility like myself. The audaciousness of some of the scenes, the griminess is really compelling and oddly endearing. You know, you feel, or at least I feel, sympathy for this guy, who is, of course, doing not nice things. And by not nice things, I mean, you know, killing people. You know, call me what you want. Call me a bleeding heart. I mean, I represent people accused of crimes for a living. I'm a public defender, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. And most people in our society think that, you know, people who do bad things, lock them up, throw away the key. I think, you know, give them a hug and some medication, and it's society's responsibility to figure out something more productive to do with them than punishing them. And I have sort of had that outlook from a very young age. And this movie, you know, it's an exploitation film. I don't know how serious it is in its dealing with themes of child abuse. People who are behind it can act and claim that it has a lot of serious intent. And I'm not poo-pooing that, but, you know, it is a different movie in that regard, in that you don't just have, you know, some masked psycho. This is sort of a cross between a slasher film and a serial killer film, like a character study. And, it's a compelling performance that I think even haters of the movie will concede is an unforgettable performance. It's not something you see every day. So
Yeah, agreed. I mean, when you were on our slashers panel, we talked about all the slashers that came out in 1980, and this is one that feels a little different than any of those. John, what are some of the things that really appeal to you about it?
An old cliche is, something that you can get something different from it each time, with repeated viewings. But that's really how I came to appreciate it a lot more. The first few times, it just hit me as a great sleazy, super violent, when you're jonesing for something like that, this is where you go. I would put it ahead of 50 other titles that serve all those same needs. But at the same time, with going back, just noticing more and more about it each time, the fact that we do get to know him a lot better than we do any other mad slasher, or at least there is more of him to get to know. There are certain other films that attempt that, but are so clumsy and unsophisticated in the presentation that it just becomes kind of ludicrous. And a lot of that is just Spinell himself. Being such an accomplished actor and also having written it himself as well. I mean, Aaron, being a writer and actor yourself, I don't even know if you've ever had the chance to portray someone that you've written yourself, but that strikes me as just such a deep dive. And that's obviously something that he did, because here's a guy we're used to seeing him in just sort of peripheral character parts, not necessarily small roles, but never in a lead. He's always played like he's just sort of the embodiment of the term skeevy, which actually derives from I can't remember the exact pronunciation of the Italian word, but schifoso or something, which means dirty, toxic, unclean, but can mean that in a spiritual sense as well. Because everybody he's ever played, in the Godfather movies and in Rocky, all those things, he's the Sultan of Skeev, basically. He is finally front and center, and we're seeing what he's capable of. And also something that I didn't come to appreciate until later on, and especially seeing on a big screen finally, and talking to Bill Lustig about this, is the design of his place, his lair, is just fucking incredible. Talk about a designer's wet dream. Like Lustig said, the whole mission of that was, this is his brain, this place where he lives. He's an artist. He's able to put himself on the walls. What they managed there in this little tiny claustrophobic space, on top of all the mannequins and everything, but just because you're constantly glancing around at all this stuff on the walls, this just jaw dropping. So I really, there's a lot to get on repeated viewings. There's plenty of just one-dimensional kind of throwaway sleazy stuff that I enjoy, but this one, I wouldn't have bet on that first viewing that I would still get that much out of it on repeated viewings. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a genuine character piece. It spends time with this person, and he's pretty much who drives the film the entire time. We don't have any. I think at one point there was a part in the script where it would cut away to like a detective, that was pursuing him, and they cut all of that out and just focused exclusively on him.
Which was wise. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicola, when you come back to this film, what are the things that keep bringing you back?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think it's like a deeply, deeply beautiful film visually, and I'm including all the blood and guts and trash and schlock and murder in that. It looks amazing. I think the performance, Joe Spinell's performance is out of this world. I think it's really invested in I think it's invested in the idea of this, what becomes kind of a trope of an insufficiently masculine killer who hates women and is going out on a murderous rampage because of his hatred of women. And I think it does that in such a much more complicated and nuanced way than we often see, especially in this is a film designed to like have disgusting set pieces in some ways,
Right.
as much as it is a character study. So I think there are so many kind of competing things happening really effectively in a way that like you don't really see it anywhere else. And I think like we really are living inside of his head, inside of his room. Like the whole film kind of takes place in his like damaged and fractured psyche, which is why I think, and I know we'll get to this later, but that the choice of the remake to be almost entirely POV shots actually is kind of a really true to the spirit of the first film, which does have a lot of POV shots, though it does kind of oscillate perspectives. And I think one of my favorite shots, which the other reason I love it, more mannequins per capita than most movies aside from Tourist Trap. Like there's just a lot of mannequins to go around, but there's POV shots from the mannequins too in the final scene, which I just think is incredible.
Well, you were talking about our Anna, Carolyn Monroe's character, would have an attraction to Frank Zito. Those are scenes that were, deliberately written in because Carolyn Monroe got attached to the film, and her husband at the time was ponying up money to make the film happen, but also on the condition that her role be beefed up. And so while those scenes do feel a little out of place, I think at times, it's also something that kind of gives Frank Zito's character a lot more range. And you can even imagine that this is how he imagines the encounter goes, as opposed to how it is going. I do like that idea, Nicola, that, we are basically seeing everything from his perspective. So, that's how I kind of make peace with the idea. We don't know how awkward or smooth he is because this is how he's seeing the encounter go.
I wanted to address something that Nicola said. One of the things that's so frustrating about a lot of the attacks on horror films, and one of the things that Carol Clover did such a great job of unpacking, it seems so obvious now, but up until, her Watershed book that, really redefined how feminism was even allowed to look at horror films. It's such a myopic idea that just because a movie has a misogynistic character, that it makes the movie misogynistic. Like, how could you tell a story about misogyny without having a misogynistic character, right? Like,
Right.
A work of art is not misogynistic because it has a misogynist in it. To someone who would say to me that as a cis male, I have no business making that argument, they can go fuck themselves, because I have every business making whatever argument I should choose. But
I would argue we're the ones who need to make those arguments.
well, no, I mean it's a ridiculous, misguided, myopic, and I would argue there's a fine line between media criticism and advocating censorship. Like, these well-intended people on the same end of the political spectrum as myself, who did this media criticism of horror movies, ended up causing these movies to be censored and banned around the world, and that's despicable and disgusting. There's a fine line between attacking a work of art and then advocating for its non-existence. But you're right. A big part of the chemistry between Joe Spinell and Caroline Monroe, she was not supposed to be the lead in the movie. Daria Nicolodi was supposed to be the lead in this movie. She was cast at the final hour at a convention. We think of conventions as not a place where like actual like important shit goes down. We think of it as like a fun time or a place where people engage in commerce or get autographs. But occasionally some really historic things happen at conventions. And Caroline Monroe was cast in Maniac at a convention. She was at a convention in October 1979, and she didn't get to go home to England. The following Monday, she's shooting Maniac. And that's a really cool story. The movie actually didn't come out in 1980. It came out on January 30th, 1981 in New York City. The chemistry pre-existed between the two of them. They had appeared in Star Crash together. Later on, they would appear in the last horror film together. But they had this chemistry in real life that I think made it all the easier for it to translate on the big screen. This general idea that in order to be able to be in a position to commit these horrible acts, in reality, most, if not all, serial killers have some degree of charisma, and it's not just, you know, good looks. There's something else there. And so apparently Joe Spinell was a charismatic person. Everyone I've spoken to who knew him describe him as such. I didn't think it was not believable as a child, and it also demonstrates his ability to lure some of the people. I mean, you know, some of the people he stalks, but others he kind of lures. And I think his charisma is supposed to be what enables him to do that.
I'm glad you brought that up, Art, that it came out in the January of 1981. In this day and age where everything lives and dies by IMDb, you know, we see 1980 Loud and Proud, and that's when it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, which is where it was picked up. So that inherently becomes its, quote, premiere date. But yeah, it did not get released nationally until 1981.
And what's so funny is, like, they thought they had such a commercial thing going. Like, on opening night at the RKO Cinerama 1, you could meet Joe Spinell and Carolyn Monroe in the lobby. Imagine, like, people seeing Maniac for the first time and then walking out all smiles, and like I really think they thought they were making like a normal horror movie. Like, obviously they knew what they had done, but I really don't think that they were trying to make a movie as sleazy and in your face as most people view Maniac. I really think, especially given like the movies they were watching in preparation. I mean, he sat Caroline Monroe down. She hadn't seen Halloween, so Bill Lustig took her to see Halloween. Like, his inspirations were Halloween, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the jump scare from Carrie. Like his inspirations for the movie, and we can look deeper certainly at Italian movies that seem to have influenced it. But like, they were trying to make a hit horror movie, and I don't think they were trying to be as grimy as most of us found the final product.
What Art was saying about Joe Spinell, but his charisma, actually, according to a lot of people who knew him, and this came up with when I spoke to Lustig as well, women were crazy about him in real life, and a lot of it, a lot of that stems also from just the fact that he was very, very loved. He helped out a lot of people just at the entry level. He was known for keeping people's contact info, and of young struggling, not just actors, but people working in all levels of the industry. And weeks later or months later, somebody was looking for somebody to fill some position. He would put them in touch with somebody that he'd met like once at a party months ago, and so he was also just very well loved for things like that. But also, think about the believability of that relationship, and how much of it is sort of coming from his point of view, and the way he's interpreting the whole thing. I think it's really impressive that right towards the end, when it becomes obvious to her who or what he really is, suddenly we're seeing things quite credibly from her point of view. Her sudden shock at all this is really palpable and really believable. That's one of the few spots where we suddenly step into somebody else's not literal POV, but just what they're thinking and feeling at that time. Much the same as we do get that from a couple of the previous victims, especially the one in the subway. That really plays out mostly from her point of view. And so at the end, when Carolyn Monroe's character has this sudden realization, it's all very believable, and we're really sort of feeling what she feels.
That subway sequence is so harrowing. I like think about that all the time. But yeah, just not to belabor the point too much, but I think whether or not it was the original intention, like, does a pretty good job, I think, of justifying the existence of their relationship as a plot point, by kind of thematizing also this idea of like preservation and like looking and watching and like keeping, because like her role as photographer and his role as like preservation of the women that he kills, he in dialogue makes that explicit kind of connection of like, oh well, I would keep the photos forever, I want to keep things I want to keep things forever. Wouldn't like this person is going to change, but the photo's never going to change. And I think it's also interesting to see like their original encounter. He notices her because she's watching him. So it kind of, there's this interesting interplay there between who's watching and who's being watched, like kind of in tandem with all of these POV shots that are from Frank's POV, but she's like the bearer of the gaze in kind of a more literal way within the film, which I think like typically like in feminist film criticism, we think of like the bearer of the gaze like diegetically is the man, but I think the gendered world of Maniac is really, really complicated because he's also kind of a Norman Bates character that he is his mother. He like so much of the Frank character is like his introjected like mother trauma, and oftentimes we're not getting like him, we're getting his mother through him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the psycho parallels are pretty clearly drawn. It's like we're just meeting Norman Bates right out of the gate. When we meet him, he seems kind of withdrawn and maybe not very social, which is I think why his interactions with Anna are a little odd. But at the same time, it's like, well, here's an opportunity for him. And I think even though they were written in from a mercenary standpoint, they become really interesting because we start to actually root for him, but we also get engaged with her. We're like, well, what's going to happen if you get into this relationship with Frank? So I think it's a really interesting, happy accident that those scenes got incorporated.
Yeah, it humanizes him a bit more as well, seeing a side that you always figured maybe was lurking there.
And she thinks he's sweet. She thinks he's an artist. She thinks he's like the remake says like the last true romantic, but that kind of captures what's happening in the original too.
Which to a degree is true.
Yes.
Unfortunately it's only like a small part of the picture that she's seeing. Yeah.
Art, you alluded to Lustig's lust for cinema. Like this is clearly somebody who doesn't just love exploitation films. I mean, there's echoes of Repulsion there. There's talk about inspiration from Bergman films. Like this is somebody who just loves movies. And I think he was trying to make the absolute best movie he could. I mean, I think Robert Lindsay's cinematography, the handheld kind of, it's just kind of wonderful. And you talked about the 16 millimeter, the fact that they processed it the way they did and were able to blow it up so that it does have a very specific look. It just doesn't look like it's 16 millimeter blown up and grainy. It looks like, no, this feels intentional. And I'd say the same thing goes along with our music, from Jay Chattaway. Like feels very unique and special.
Like they were trying to make the best and most technically adept movie that they could with the means that they had. It's a very early use of Dolby sound. The soundtrack was originally going to be done by Goblin. Right. I mean, of course, we can't imagine it without the current music that it has. One of the things that is amusing about the soundtrack, I've been watching a lot of movies from Hong Kong lately to brush up on my Hong Kong film knowledge since I've done some Category 3 audio commentaries. And there's a movie from Hong Kong called Devil Returns that a lot of the time people mention that it includes the theme from The Exorcist and a couple of other music cues from big horror movies. But mainly it just uses the score from Maniac throughout. And it's just wild watching this movie from another country with the soundtrack of Maniac. Savini and his effects, of course, are a huge part of the success of this movie. Savini worked on one Hong Kong movie called Till Death Do We Stare. And there's another Hong Kong movie called The Hong Kong Butcher, where they drive by a movie theater, and on the marquee you can see Till Death Do We Stare, which is the movie Savini did the effects on. I'm wondering if there was some connection between Savini working over there so shortly after Maniac and then the music ending up on this soundtrack. But, his effects in this movie are nothing short of groundbreaking. Even though it's the death of himself and a male character, the exploding head is just an incredible effect. His reuse of props from other movies is amusing. At the end of the movie, you can see Pamela Voorhees on the ground. The headless Pamela Voorhees appears in that final sequence. He tried to do a similar character in both the last horror film and The Undertaker, but the character in this movie and his relationship with Caroline Monroe is unmatched. I mean, I first met her back in 2002. You know, she's just a cinematic wonder herself. I mean, she was a Bond girl, and like the reason she agreed to do this movie largely was because of her love for Spinell in real life. The scene on the subway is fascinating in so many ways, including that they stole that location, and
Yep.
that's an advanced scene to just shoot without a permit. They had Randy Jurgensen, who was the real life inspiration for the main character in Cruising. He's also in the recent George Carlin documentary because he was childhood friend of George Carlin's. He was just like standing watch, like that was like the extent of their security while they were shooting this thing on the subway. And I'll shut up in just a moment, but like one last little personal tidbit. When I was in law school, most of the time we were out there. Alana worked at an AIDS service organization, helping the HIV positive community. Before that, when we first got there, she worked at a video store, and there was this middle-aged guy working there, and he's talking to her about movies. He's like, "Oh, you like old exploitation movies?" The guy's name was Robert K. Feldman, and it turned out he was one of the grips on Maniac. He also worked on Bloody Birthday and some other movies of that time period. Talking to him about being on the set of Maniac, he made it sound just like totally wild. First of all, he had these cool, like, exclusive behind the scenes photos that he showed us. He told us this wild story about one night after just shooting way too many hours straight. The grips and the other technical people on the crew just had like a giant street fight. These like people just like went to fisticuffs because they were so angry at each other over this setup or that setup. While it's an exploitation movie, certainly I think people forget what that means. It doesn't have anything to do with how good the final product is. An
That's right.
exploitation film is just a movie that tries to succeed financially by exploiting current trends, niche genres, or lurid content, and it has nothing to do with how good a movie is. It has to do with how a movie's marketed, and of course this movie with its poster with a killer with a boner in the poster and an ad campaign. I warned you not to go out tonight. It's inherently an exploitation movie, but that doesn't make it any less of a work of art. Ganja and Hess is an exploitation movie, but it's a held in extremely high regard. Just because something's an exploitation movie doesn't mean that it's not highly artistic. They used Savini. They used quality music. They cast the movie as well as they could. They tried very hard to come up with a final product that would stand the test of time. And boy, has it stood the test of time. And I will shut up now.
No. Thank you for all of that. I mean, because that's the thing, is that I don't think you can deny the quality of this film. Like if you look at
Right.
Lorenzo Marinelli's editing, like the editing in this film is sharp and it does a lot of different things. They were talking about they would do a lot of the walking scenes where the stalking is happening. That's just basically them walking back and forth and then changing up the lenses and changing up the focus and just changing a little bit of the background. It reminds me very much of what Toby Hooper and his team did with Texas Chainsaw, where they're just whirling in circles and it seems like you're running forever, but you're really just staying in that same area.
Funny enough, there was something that the editor at the time at Rue Morgue, is when Ivanka Vukovic was there. She just asked me to bring up this one point with Lustig when we were doing the live Q&A. New York filmmakers, almost right across the board, like from Scorsese to Lloyd Kaufman to Abel Ferrara, and just all these people, practically everybody but Woody Allen. Something they all have in common is like all of these guys in person, they will gush about how much they love New York City, how that's the only place they could ever call home. It's the most wonderful city in the world, and yet they invariably depict it as hell on earth. Right? and certainly, I mean, how many movies do that quite as vividly as Maniac? Just like the really genuine sense of grime there that funny you should bring up Toby Hooper there, Aaron. Like talk about somebody who can just make you feel filthy just looking at the frame, right? Lustig, is very much in agreement with that it's just something that New York filmmakers in general are steeped in, no matter what kind of films they're making, that they tend to, like, unless they're trying to show the absolute best parts of the city, like as a cultural mecca, that it's either that or you're just down in the gutter, basically. People that you have on here regularly, your panel of experts, if you ask any of them, like, to name all the non-horror films that every horror fan should see, I mean, how many of them would mention Taxi Driver, which Lustig acknowledged was a big influence on Maniac, and came just about 5 years or something previous, and
also featuring Joe Spinell.
Yeah. Funny enough, the genuine, the authentic grime of it all really plays into just how downbeat the story is. Well, you brought up the music with that fretless bass, that mournful thing, and there's lots of like crash bang stings and whatnot on the soundtrack, but you keep going back to the theme music is just this very sad, mournful motif that you keep coming back to there.
Nicola, let's go ahead and circle around to some of the big brain themes. I think there's a lot to unpack in this film. Straight out of the gate, it's a very effective serial killer movie with great effects, a great central performance, but I think there's a lot of stuff going on underneath it, and I think that's why it survives.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've gestured towards some of the big thoughts that I have about it, but I think this is a film that was sort of made to be read alongside Carol Clover. Her argument essentially in Men, Women, and Chainsaws is that the slasher film sets up a symbolic world in which gender is kind of more malleable than we might originally imagine. And she writes, I have a quote here: "The slasher film, because of its crudity and compulsive repetitiveness, gives us a clearer picture of current sexual attitudes than do the legitimate products of the better studios." And I think no film perhaps better exemplifies a repetition compulsion than this film, because he is just so psychologically plagued and so tormented, and we see this push and pull between his own sort of sweet artistic romantic personality and his mother's sort of warnings to him of the dangers of women, but on the flip side of her warnings about how dangerous women are to men, he has borne witness to her with John's essentially repeatedly over and over again, and has been physically abused kind of as part of that experience, so that he has this whole world of sexual dysfunction living inside him at any moment when he essentially comes into contact with a beautiful woman. All of those things are sort of happening within him at the same time, wanting to preserve them, wanting them not to leave him, wanting them to love him, being afraid they're going to hurt him, being afraid that they're dangerous to him, also being afraid about what men do to women. And so I just think that it's there are so many layers upon layers here. Then the mannequins, because I have to talk about the mannequins, but they kind of function as a double disavowal. He uses them as stand-ins for his victims. They also function as fetish objects, and they kind of allow him to leave his image of his mother untainted by transferring this idea of lack onto himself as he brings the mannequins to life within his mind. So he's preserving the victims that function as mother surrogates in a non-threatening state, at least temporarily, as the mannequins. But that's a psychological world that just that this temporary stasis is always approaching disintegration. The center cannot hold. It's always deteriorating rapidly. So I don't know. I think that's a lot of my big thoughts all at once in a way that hopefully made some sense.
all of those different levels that you're mentioning there, also just because of the way his mind is disintegrating, they all, no pun intended, bleed into each other as well. They're all these sort of little gray areas as well. I was thinking when you're talking about the with the mannequins, but the one scene in particular where he goes into yet another sort of personality where he's playing this kind of effeminate hairdresser guy, where he's nailing the scalps onto them, and he's got this, what is it, like a smoking jacket or something on, and sort of talking in his mother's voice, but it's also, there's this third entity there that I think it's the only time in the film that you really get that as well. So these things, there are all these sort of shadow realms between them as well. They all kind of, it's like a demolition derby kind of.
Maniac is like primarily everything that Nicholas said is interesting and provocative. I think what stands out to me, big picture wise, in the movie is that it really is about cycles of abuse, and it really does draw sympathy towards a character that ordinarily would not be portrayed with any degree of sympathy whatsoever. And certainly given what I do professionally, people tend to be selective in their empathies in our society. I appreciate when a work of art tries to shine a little bit of sympathy on a villain. I also appreciate that my good friend Leon Marcello brought me dirt from Joe Spinell's grave. I'm not a big collector of this type of thing, but if you put it in my hand, I will certainly not reject it, and we'll keep it around. Great. I have dirt from exactly 2 graves here, one being Joe Spinell and the other being Gigi Allen, both of which were gifted to me. I just think Maniac is such a cool movie, and any connections I can find to it in any other movie, like when Bruce Hollowcheck pointed out the marquee in the Hong Kong movie that Savini had worked on, that was a big moment in my movie nerd life. But whether you're talking about the technical merits of Maniac or the performances or the big picture issues that it tends to tackle, it's a great film on all levels. It's one that I can rewatch any day of the week.
Yeah, and R.I.P. Joe Spinell, because this was one that definitely was a project that was near and dear to his heart. And as you mentioned, John, like, he co-wrote the screenplay. He came up with the story and co-wrote the screenplay with it. He did a lot of just kind of his own dialogue. And I think that is, him kind of writing to his strengths, but also writing to things that he wanted to be able to do. I don't imagine Joe Spinell gets cast as an effeminate hairdresser too often. And so here was an opportunity for him to play that part. All of the stream of consciousness stuff that happens, that was the stuff that really struck me. I'm like, this is riding purely on his completely invested performance. I think his enthusiasm, we haven't even talked about the fact that he and his friend Luke Walter, they basically served as a 2-person second unit, where they would go out after the shooting was done for the day. They would say, hey, can we borrow the camera and some film? And they would go out and walk the streets of New York, like all of those shots of Frank walking by the bridal shops and things like that. Those are all things that were just shot in the middle of the night. And I think it's the kind of personality that Spinell was looking to bring to the project. And I think that's one thing that this film absolutely has, is its own personality. It does not feel like any other film.
It was certainly one of the most protested movies of its time. That was something Lustig addressed, was that there are plenty of other movies from that era that are just as gory, but feel so totally different. That there were very few people who were protesting The Evil Dead, which is same vintage. And played all the same grindhouses, but talk about just a completely and utterly different feel from it.
And I think you're right. I mean, similar to Hooper's Texas Chainsaw, it was the feel that got people uncomfortable. It wasn't any particular. Listen to it, really, it was the audio commentary on that 4K release that came out a few years back. They were talking about how Spinell, being a working Hollywood actor, he was somebody that was SAG, and they were obviously shooting a non-union film. And so they deliberately wrote the script over the top, and they included all of these awful set pieces throughout so that the MPAA would not give it an R rating, and therefore it could not qualify as a SAG film. Go Joe Spinell. Let's switch gears to 2012's. And as I was saying off camera, when the news came out that they were going to be remaking Maniac, I was like, really? Why and how? How could you possibly? Because that film survives on its sense of time and place and Joe Spinell's performance. I don't think we would have a film without those elements. The film, produced by Alexandre Aja and directed by Frank Calhoun, comes out. And what are people's thoughts on the 2012 Maniac? Art, do you mind if we kick things off with you?
Sure, I can probably be one and done here. I don't have a ton to say about it. So I am fed up with the follower, poser, anti-remake, pull the string horror fan. Remakes, no one has anything original. This is what people said about sequels in the 80s, and awesome movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 were reviled when they first. How can you make a sequel to the Texas Chainsaw? Well, here's how you can make a sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, asshole. Watch it. It's awesome. These same dipshits who are so anti-remake, 9 out of 10 times their favorite movie is The Thing, a remake, you know? Or you'll actually hear them say shit like, how can you remake Last House on the Left, which in and of itself was kind of sort of a remake and has been remade a million times, and those are like all of Art Ettinger's favorite movies. So, like, shut the fuck up about remakes already. You're not that smart. You're not that clever. And like these everything lacks originality. The best horror movies of all time, you can summarize the plot in 1 or 2 sentences. It's not originality usually. It's the execution, right? Is what drives what genre films we love. But that having been said,
I'm glad you didn't have much to say, Art.
I'll get it all out because it's not a long. I don't have a lot of notes here. I fucked up when I heard that the Maniac remake was coming out, and I heard that it was directed by Frank Calhoun, who directed P2. I was excited. P2 is one of my favorite horror movies of this millennium. I think it's an incredible movie. Saw it in the theater when it came out. Watch it in my Christmas movie marathon every year. It's a great film. And so, you know, he was one. I think he was an actor in High Tension, but he directed P2. I was excited, and me being me, I wanted to see the movie as soon as I could before other people's opinions of it would influence me. And before it was released here, it opened here on June 21st, 2013 was when it opened in New York City. It came out on Blu-ray in Germany. But what I didn't know was it came out in 2 different versions, a cut and an uncut version. And so I bought this Blu-ray all the way from Germany, and I fucking bought the cut version. So I watched this like neutered version of the Maniac remake when I first watched it. And so I think that really gave me a bad taste for the movie, that when I did get the uncut version shortly thereafter, I didn't appreciate it too much more. And when I rewatched the movie a month or so ago in preparation for this, it has its points, it has its moments, but I think one of the things that it really suffers from is the fact that Murder Set Pieces exists. So Murder Set Pieces is basically a remake or reimagining of Maniac. It's shot on 35 millimeter. It's a really disgusting, in-your-face movie that I adore. I think it's a great roller coaster ride, and it's what the Maniac remake should have been. I really dislike the overt tributes to the original in that first date when he's like, "What did you expect?" And she describes, like a greasy, long-haired, like she describes Joe Spinell with all these pejoratives. I thought that was really lame. I thought the shot where they tried to redo the poster of the original in the reflection of the car, I thought that was really lame. And the fact that it's not shot on film, movies that aren't shot on film from around that time period have a really dated look, especially the outdoor sequences. Now, that having been said, there are some things I did like about the movie. I did like the super duper ton of mannequins. That was cool. Definitely made me think of Tourist Trap. I thought the switch to LA from New York was handled really well. And one of the things that I think Frank Calhoun really picked up on in the original Maniac that he tries to recreate in the remake is when you're in these giant cities, and I've spent a lot of time in New York, some time in LA, but a lot more in New York, you have these weird moments where even though you're in this giant hustle and bustle city, you have these moments of like quiet where you're on a street and like there's no one around and you could drop a pin and hear it. And like that's something that is portrayed in both the original and the remake in a really interesting way. I think the remake had some good ideas. I think it has a good cast, but man, it just does not just did not work for me, and I really wanted it to. I'm not anti-remake. I love the director. I think maybe my appreciation of it is marred by the fact that I saw it so heavily cut when I first saw it. So I will concede that really may have had a big effect on my opinion of the movie. I don't think it's a terrible movie. It certainly has some artistry to it and definitely a lot of good ideas. I think it doesn't all come together well, and I think it already has a very dated look, which is why people should shoot on film if and when at all possible.
Nicola, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I actually quite like the Maniac remake. I think that, for better or worse, what it does to me, to my mind, quite effectively is like literalizing some of the thematic landscape of the original. And I think in a way that is like inventive and, productive a lot of the time. Like now he's not only, acquiring mannequins to sort of preserve his victims, but he's like involved in the preservation of mannequins like broadly. And it's his mother's shop and it's like inherited over time. And, Anna's a photographer and she takes photos of mannequins and tries to endow them with life using, the medium at her disposal. I think, that's done pretty well. I mentioned earlier that kind of the romanticism of the sweetness and the romanticism of the character is played up a little bit in Elijah Wood's iteration of it. Some of the women, and I will say Lucy in particular in this movie, she's the first one that he really takes on a date, and they meet on a dating app or dating website called Cupid's Rejects, and she is the stereotype of an alternative woman who is just rabidly horny, and it is the way that she behaves is does also put kind of a bad taste in my mouth. Not to say that women can't act like that, but she's just foaming at the mouth for Elijah Wood to fuck her hard, and it's I think kind of more salacious than perhaps the rest of the film is tonally. It just feels kind of a get them in with this sexy scene and then now they're hooked kind of thing. Something else I really love about this movie, it reminds me of Under the Skin, which is my favorite movie. A lot of the way that he is prowling through the city using those point of view shots, and then we also see the first shot we see of him is his eyes in the rear view mirror. So again, thinking about screens and watching and being watched and how the cinema animates people and deadens them at the same time. I think that's happening here. But the number one thing that sells me on this movie is that it really, even more so than the original, effectively captures the experience of what it feels like to be a woman walking alone at night, and to be wary. And that I think that's very interesting that it does that so well from within his point of view. But the very first sequence I think is kind of amazing, watching that woman outside of the nightclub as she her friend leaves and she's being harassed a little bit, and Elijah Wood, Frank, makes some comment under his breath about how disgusting that man is, and then when he comes in close proximity to her, he also says something to her you're so beautiful, really quietly, and that's just as insidious a form of masculinity as the one that we see that's more overt. So I think that's most of my monologue. I actually do have another point about how this film handles the split between real reality and Frank's reality, but I think that I'll save that point, put a pin in it, and we'll come back to it.
Yep, I definitely want to talk about that because I feel like that's on full display. John, what are your thoughts on the Maniac remake?
I actually made a couple of notes for myself. That's why while you were doing that, you could see I was doing, because there were a couple of things that Nicola brought up that's oh shit, I've sort of got my own take on that I got to bring up there. At the risk of being too autobiographical here, I first saw this maybe just not too long after it came out, or maybe a year or so. But this was during a period of absolutely fucking bottoming right out personally. So it's not a great film to watch when you're in that state anyway. But I didn't remember it all that well, and then realized it's because I passed out while watching it. Because back then I didn't generally black out while wasted, but I did pass out while wasted. And so that's why I had just a few little vignettes of it in my head, and then rewatched it last night and liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I thought it wasn't perfect, but the things that I liked a lot. Again, as Aaron said, why do you need a remake of that? I'm very much on the same page there. But if you got to have one, I'm glad to see it done well. I mean, and funny enough, this is Alexander Aja and his writing partner there, Greg Levasseur. My reaction when I heard that they were remaking The Hills Have Eyes way back was total cynicism. Being a huge fan of The Hills Have Eyes, and I was so pleasantly surprised by that remake. I really I was shocked at how much I enjoyed it. So, and I'd forgotten that they had written this, and that this director was like an associate of theirs. One thing that often didn't work for me is the dialogue in it. There's some very pithy bits and whatnot, but a lot of it sounded like it was written in French and then rather indifferently translated, and they didn't bother to give it much nuance. It just sounded like it was done in a hurry. It was interesting how it's shot largely POV. Something that jumped out at me was the first time it really cuts away, because yes, you're getting all these reflections of him, especially the rear view mirror. That's a pretty much a direct quote from Taxi Driver right there. The finale of Taxi Driver, where he scares himself looking in the mirror. It was an interesting point to cut away from that during that. What was that? The second murder scene. It's at about the 40-minute mark, and it's in the middle of him stabbing this woman to death. And suddenly, like we're over here. I found that kind of jarring, and yet it kind of worked for me. I don't know where you all stood on that, or did it jump out at you? Or
well, I think that's kind of one of the things that Nicola was alluding to, is how we watch Frank kind of disassociate, or the film disassociates with him. I think either interpretation is really fun and interesting. That Frank watches himself doing the deeds as opposed to being in his own body. Or the film is like, we are not on Frank's side anymore, or we're just observing. We want you to see what's happening. This person that you are inhabiting, as the viewer, if we're looking at it through his eyes, we're asking the viewer to kind of identify with. And it's like, here's an opportunity to not identify with, to observe, and to, when you come back together, how have your feelings changed? Nicola, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly my thoughts. I think it's the only times that we see him we see him from outside of his own perspective is kill sequences and then fantasy sequences. And so I think that also puts the kill sequences in the same sort of like fantasy space, like state of exception, which it functions sort of to distance Frank from himself, to distance us from him, but also to kind of like remove the kills from reality, because they're kind of like they're happening like to him. They're happening like from outside of him, or like from within him, like his mother kind of, but they're not. It's not the same thing as like living inside his head the rest of the time. And so I think that choice is, I don't think it always feels right, but I think that decision forces you really to think really hard about like, what is POV, what is not POV, and like, why are we seeing him in these moments in a way that, to me feels kind of true to the psychological state of the original, or like a new facet to uncover about the psychology of Frank from the original.
That's what that first murder sequence, I think, is supposed to be, is his like exaggerated view of what like an oversexed or hypersexual female is. That scene, when I was watching it the first time, I was like, this is ridiculous, and anyone behind the making of this knows that this is ridiculous. And then I'm like, is this supposed to be like real, or like an exaggerated version of events in his head? And then the stagey dialogue, that's normally an attribute that I really, really like in movies. Like, there was a movie last year called Miller's Girl that was just panned almost universally. And I think the only other two people I know who like it are my partner Alana and Mike Hunchback. But it's written in that David Mamet kind of stagey, non-realistic dialogue, which this movie has, and ordinarily I connect with. I think this movie is, is not really trying to portray realism, except for in the sense of like what a maniac would perceive reality as, if that makes sense. Or maybe we're giving this movie far too much credit, and again, amusing ourselves with our intellects. But it like that first character, she's so ridiculous, right? Like that can't be anything but like his interpretation of what a hookup would be. I don't think that's supposed to be exactly what's happening, but I don't know.
No, I definitely agree with you that it's not supposed to be exactly what's happening. I think it just feels like, I mean, the reason that I was critiquing it is like not necessarily on the realism front, but more so like it's tonally out of, like, I think that version of the woman that he is like imagining in that scene, we don't see that come up again. And so I
Very
think
true.
it feels like a different perception of femininity than like throughout the rest of the film we see him handle encounters with women in a much different way. And and so it feels off and out of step to me, even as like I agree with you that I don't think it's meant to be like this is how women act.
Well, that's a very good point.
Two of the victims kind of jump out at me there, and that one in particular. Also, there seemed to be a much more basic problem with that, was the staginess and just how sort of over the top and deliberate that all was. That also, to me, smacks of having to compress something. Like if they'd been able to take longer with that scene, they wouldn't have needed to make her as much of a cartoon. The other one that jumped out at me that I thought was a really interesting choice, just story wise, towards the end, the woman, I think she's like an agent or something. She's at the woman he meets at the party, follows her home. Whereas all these other women are, even the one that we were just talking about is still, she's kind of sympathetic, and the others, we really feel for. I thought it was kind of a ballsy choice to make this later victim somebody that we just fucking hate from the get-go. I mean, she's a horrible person, and yet he's going to do the exact same thing to her, and we're going to wind up feeling the same thing for her. This person who like I don't know about all of you, but I just like, because I know her. I know a lot of her. I've met her a million times, and I can't fucking stand her. And it's like, okay, well, she's going to get off, fine. And then I'm watching this happen, going, my God, no, this is just as awful. And I thought that was a really interesting choice to make somebody really genuinely unlikable.
Yeah, you're not like rooting for her to get killed. She gets killed in a really horrible way that you do go, you didn't deserve that.
Yeah.
Well, and then she also gets to be the stand-in for the mother, more literally than the others, because she's like, I mean, A, she's an older woman, but B, she's sort of like this like castrating presence. Her immediate dismissiveness of like the art world. I will correct myself a little and say that like I suppose women do act that way. And one other scene in the movie, which is at the end when he's brought like the Anna mannequin back to his apartment, and then the other women are sort of like, the mannequins are there, and then there's this oscillation between the mannequins and the real women, and all the real women are sort of like laying claim to Frank, and saying things that they did say. Or actually, the reason I thought of this is because like the Rita, that's the character we've been talking about, like she says something like, asks him if he played with dolls as a kid, which actually was a line that Anna's boyfriend had asked him. So it's just like all muddled up there. But then they're kind of like, he's mine, and like acting a little bit more like cartoonish in that way that we see in the first scene. So it's kind of a bookend.
Yeah. But that sort of brought me to the other thing is her being the one that's closest to the mother. I'm wondering what if it's this struck any of you. I found the whole the mother story and the mommy issues and all of this, that was something that I found a lot less compelling in this one. I think it's just, mom was a hooker and she did a lot of coke and whatnot. There isn't the angle of abuse with her. I can't quite buy into the long-standing hatred issues about mother in this one the way you can in the original, because there's no, in the original he still got like scars on where she burned him with cigarettes and whatnot, and I was waiting to see something along those lines, and I don't, unless I missed something, I don't think we did.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, they do literalize that a lot clearer in the remake, and I agree. I don't think it's as interesting. I think it's making sure everyone gets it. One thing I like about the original is it really trusts its audience to go along for the ride, relate to Frank or not. We have a very different persona in Elijah Wood than Joe Spinell's interpretation, which I think was a smart move on their part in terms of like not trying to recreate what went before and trying to create something completely different. I can still see Elijah Wood's interpretation as someone who has so much insecurity and is coming from a very different place of masculinity, but it's still just as dangerous, the rejection and the pain of that he's grown up with.
Because when I first heard that he was in that was where I was hoping they would go. You can either find some guy to Spinell stand in, and there are people who probably could do that, but trying to make Elijah Wood that kind of greasy, skeevy guy wouldn't work. And here it's more like, okay, let's turn David Byrne into a real psycho killer.
Yeah.
Now, how awesome would that movie be, though? True stories, except instead of John Goodman singing, you'd have David Byrne like cutting heads off.
One of the piddling detail, but something that just made me go, holy shit, was the fact that the woman, the agent, the one he meets at the party, she is the one who he scalps while she's still alive. Because it was one of those moments where you're just going, no, they're not gonna, and then it happens. Just, oh fuck, that happens.
Yep. Nicola, do you have anything you want to offer there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a little bit of a departure, but we are talking kind of broadly about like how the approach of the remake. I think something that I did love in the very final sequence, which is like not exactly the same, but largely it's like all the women have become mannequins, and then the mannequins have come to life and they're enacting their revenge on him, which is just like, oh my gosh, I love it so much in both versions. But I think something that I really loved in this iteration that does feel like, a nod, and maybe like it's maybe like a wink or like the special effects like of the original like were visible in particular in the final scene with his head popping off. But there's a moment that I think is so clever in the end sequence of the 2012 version where they've ripped they're like scalping him sort of with their hands while he's alive also, and they've ripped his face off, and under his face is a mannequin face, and it is sort of a play on like, obviously, Joe Spinell's head is replaced in the final sequence at the end with like a
wait, what? Really?
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed.
It's very just like that of an actor.
But I think that like it's kind of like a nice nod and an interesting interpretation, where also there's at least one other sequence where this version of Joe Spinell has sort of like a more of an OCD type, where he's like scrubbing his hands sort of incessantly using steel wool also, which looks so painful. But we see his hand as a mannequin hand in at least one of those like POV shots of his hands washing. So there's something happening there too, where like with the escapes, from his perspective, that like he doesn't feel real.
There's so many things. It's kind of what some of you have said, like there's many things about this that I really appreciate. The big swing. I appreciate the attempt to do something different that isn't just a retread, but that also just doesn't feel different for different sake. So I give this one a lot of credit. I'm always going to be returning to, like you, John, I hadn't seen the remake until this came back around. So it had been a while since I had checked it out. I'm not unhappy that I went back and watched it again for sure.
Yeah.
But certainly the Bill Lustig one is the one that I think people will continue to talk about. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and circle back around for final thoughts.
Doesn't get much better than Maniac, and as much as I can't stand the anti-remake brigade, and as much as I try to understand the fans of the remake, it just fell short for me in so many ways. But the original Maniac is a comfort film for me. It's movie magic. It's yet another romantic comedy you can watch with your loved ones, and I just adore it so much, and I've enjoyed speaking about it with you all tonight.
Thanks, Art. John.
Again, it's one that I keep discovering more that I like every time I come back. Even now, I mean, now where I'm down to like little details, but it seems like there's still like one little thing will jump out at me for the first time every time I revisit it, which is that's the mark of something special. Just a couple more quick things about the remake. Something I think we touched on before. I think it was a little better at depicting just the kind of casual intimidation that women go through on a more or less daily basis. You get a lot of great, that opening scene in particular. That was really put across better in this one, and it seemed in a very effortless way, and that really underscored everything else. I'm afraid I got to part company with you, Nicola, on the ending. I found the ending really labored. I thought a perfect cutoff point would have been where she jumps out of the van and stabs him with the mannequin hand. I love the poetry of that, and I thought, yeah, please just let him die right now. I love the whole notion about the mannequins coming to life at the end of the original. I really could have lived without that in the remake. I think it's one of those movies that it seemed like they tried to tack on about 3 more endings, where they would have been better off putting when they were ahead.
Nicola.
Yeah, that leads me pretty well, I think, because the Anna character is kind of more of a final girl in the 2012 version, in that she fights back and stabs him with the mannequin. But I'm going to end, since we're doing final thoughts, with a little excerpt from my big swing at the end of my paper. So I wrote, this is from years ago. I don't know how I feel about this interpretation, but it's interesting. In the end, the maniac is vanquished, castrated, feminized, but not by the one girl who has survived. Instead, Frank is taken out by a horde of his frenzied victims who are actually mannequins, who are actually projections of his mother. In a convoluted relay of displacements and disavowals, Frank becomes his own final girl, his split identity taking on both sides of the killer-kill dichotomy, rendered as a fantastical revenge scenario in which his mannequin trophies come to life to seek retribution for their brutal murders. And I think the reason that I did want to bring that back is because I think the idea of the final girl, I've been talking about Clover a lot today, and I think it's one of those concepts that has taken on a life of its own, but has become really limiting in how people think about what's happening in the world of the slasher film. And so I just kind of wanted to throw a little bit of a wrench into that concept in this paper, and think about what these conceptual frameworks offer us, and also what they leave out.
Thank you. This is one of these films that I do love returning to, and I was really looking forward to this conversation because I think it is something that's a little bit different. And for me, what always drives through is that there is a burning desire to make a movie. I feel that from every single one of these, and a lot of these folks are at the beginning of their career, whereas Joe Spinell was an established actor at this point. But this is Bill Lustig's first mainstream quote film, his cohorts that are just eager to make a movie. And I love watching that scrappiness, but I also like the fact that they don't skimp on the quality. They are doing their absolute best in terms of cinematography, in terms of editing, in terms of acting, in terms of story. I would say all of you no budget filmmakers out there, pull out your copy of Maniac one more time and take a look at it and see, that they're not just setting up sloppy camera angles. They are not skimping on getting a great soundtrack. They are not skimping on getting great performances. Those are the things that are going to stand the test of time. So take a little time and make it happen. Thank you all so much. It's been a great conversation. Looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.